Okay, here we are, AWS certification. Okay, so this may look familiar to you. So we are, since this is one of the ML classes, it's not, it's not big data, it's not deep learning, but whatever, it's an ML class, right? This, I would say this is pretty much now at least one of the core classes they recommend you take for machine learning. But I'm going to show you the full AWS ramp up guide on this, which I've talked to almost most of the AI trainers on this. It's a little bit of overtraining, but I got to tell you, it really gets you ready for the role. If you do everything listed in the official AWS guide on this, you're going to be ready for some data science. I'm just going to say that, right? You might be a little overtrained, but it's okay. Is there really such a thing when you want to get skilled at your job? Nah. If you want to hit the ground running, it might be too much. Now, you notice, just to frame this up, is that machine learning is a purple hexagon over on the far right-hand side, right? So you can see it way over here. Now, it is not in line with cloud practitioner to go to like professional to associates. It's not in line with these two, which all lead to DevOps engineering. It's basically one of the 5 that's over there by itself. And for those of you who may remember, there used to be an Alexa certification. It's gone. I don't know. Now, it is actually recommended that because it used to be that in order to take a specialty exam like this one, you had to have something from over here. My recommendation, not my requirement, is that you actually still have a solutions architect's knowledge, because without that, you're going to be missing some of the basic assumptions that they're going to have. Now, can you pick those up in the machine? Of course you can. You can pick anything up, right? But just know that you might not have the context to feel like if you're like, man, I got to get a 96 or 100 on that exam. Yeah, it might be a little tougher if you don't have historical knowledge with a lot of the just core services like S3 and whatnot. Okay. Like for example, there were a lot of questions on the exam about Athena. By the way, has any data scientists here touched Athena? Hey, buddy. Just out of curiosity. No. Some, a little. Good. Okay. Well, then you probably know enough, honestly, to how it works. But like that's the kind of thing they're going to assume you know. But again, don't worry. In the certification study guide and the practice exams, we're going to make sure that you know enough about Athena. But they do assume that you know that kind of thing, right? So it used to be like they had to take the associate's architecture exam. You don't have to anymore. Don't worry about it, right? Now you can just go straight in. But if you did have time, if you weren't under the, some pressure, because it sounds like you are, if you have a March kind of like deadline, then, normally I would say, yeah, let's go spend some time doing solutions architecture associate. But it sounds like that might be a little too much for this. All right. So all that being said, you can take obviously any exam at any point in time with no prerequisites. So then let's focus now on the machine learning specialty exam, which is going to have a lot of the similar characteristics to the other exams. Because just to say this, all of the exams are scenario/trivia exams, but don't let me make them small. The machine learning exam is not easy. As a matter of fact, just to say this, when I hit, question, I think was it 65? I think it was 65 because I just took the DevOps one too. Yeah, it was 65. I just took the DevOps one too. That was 75, so it threw me off. When I took question 65 and I hit submit, I was like, man, I'm pretty sure that I just failed that exam, which by the way, I have never said on any exam. We go through my exam history later on, which we will. I've taken, pretty much all the exams except for like the 3 of the specialty exams in my history. I've never said to myself at the end of the exam, I'm not sure I passed that. Feels like I failed it, right? Never said that. The machine learning exam, I was like, you know what? I'm not feeling good about this. And here's why. I'm going to tell you why I thought that. I forgot that 15 of the questions on the machine learning exam are unscored, which means they don't count towards your final score. And I'm going to tell you how I know this in just a second, but just be aware that these are scenario-based exams, but they're not easy. Now, just to say this is if you take the SysOps administrator exam, by the way, this one right here, this one does have a hands-on lab, and Amazon is moving towards that. So they are moving towards adding labs into all of their exams. but that's not true for the machine learning specialties today. Let's talk about the machine learning specialty in some detail. So this is a 65 question, 180-minute exam. So as you can imagine, 65 questions, you can do the math, you get a little bit less than 3 minutes per, right? You get like 2 and change, 2.5 and change to work through the 65 questions. It is going to be multiple choice or like multiple right answer, multiple response. Now you get a voucher, so it's not going to be $300 for you, but normally it's $300. Do note that when you pass this, you do get benefits, like give you like a 50% off on your next exam. Amazon will encourage you, right? You get free practice exams on their website, which honestly are not that great, but they are there. So, that's it. So just first thing to know is that it's 180 minutes. By the way, you cannot go to the bathroom or do anything. You can't drink anything the entire time. So make sure you're hydrated, but not caffeinated, because if you go to the bathroom, you can't. The exam's over at that point. Okay. Now, it has some summaries here, and that's pretty good. That's not really what we want. Let's go take a look at the exam guide. There's an exam guide for every single exam that you just saw with those hexagons. If you decide to take that certification, please make sure you look at the exam guide first, because this is going to give you some really great ideas about how to prepare. First and foremost, they do recommend that you have 2 years or more hands-on knowledge with ML. Is that a hard requirement? No. You can fudge that if you're willing to really double down and focus on machine learning and do nothing else for 6 months to a year. You can. But you really need to put in the time. Like I said, there's no shortcuts here really for this. You should have the basic knowledge around kind of these kind of basic things as it relates to ML algorithms, including hyperparameter optimization, knowledge of the frameworks, the ability at least to follow best practices, follow deployment models, and operational best practices. What's considered out of scope? Well, hopefully that makes a lot of sense to you, right? Complex mathematical proofs, computations, extensive or complex algorithm development, not in scope. Now, there's also, by the way, a list of services at the end that are out of scope. I'll let you look at those on your own time. I said it was multiple choice or multiple response. Again, 65 questions. You might say, well, Michael, how did you know those questions were unscored? Well, I forgot, actually. And so those 15 questions defeated me. I got to tell you, they started asking me all these questions about services that I was like, they're nowhere on. These 15 questions are nowhere on, was nowhere on my study guide. I didn't have a computer vision or NLP or anything like, I was like, I kind of know this peripherally, but it was like asking me questions about AWS forecast, by the way, which just does basically inferences in forecasting, right? And I kind of let that kind of eat me a little bit. So even us, pros are not immune to this kind of like mind game. So note that you won't know, by the way, which of those questions are unscored, but I got to tell you, I was pretty clear when I took the ML exam, because I was like, you're asking me what? AWS forecast is nowhere on this thing. Now, did I not take it seriously? No, I took every single question seriously, but I want you to know that you are purposely going to have questions that you probably don't know the answer to, because Amazon's testing questions to see if people know them or not. Because if people are getting the questions right, then what they do is they start folding it into the exam. They think it's unfair to test people on recent services. So services have to be 6 months old before they show up in the exam. And so they'll ask you questions about these services, even though they were deployed 60 days ago, just to see if you know enough about it. And if enough people start getting it right, then they'll start throwing it into the questions. Does that not make sense to anybody, what I just said? Okay. Other things to note is that 750 is your minimum passing score. It can go up or down, plus or minus like 10 or 20 points. Why? That's the minimum passing score, right? Did I say up or down? It can go up a little bit. In general, though, you have to have a 750 to pass. Sometimes it's a 760, sometimes it's 770. Let me ask you this question. If only 50 questions are scored, how many questions do I need to get right to pass the exam? Assuming all questions are weighted equally. That's a good question. Yeah, over 3/4. Yeah, about 38 questions, right? Yeah, there we go. Good. Yeah, so you're gonna be about 38 questions. Now, are you gonna know what you got right or wrong on the exam? No, you're not, but you're gonna know whether or not you knew the answer or whether you didn't. I would be very careful about tracking your score per se, because you're not gonna have any space to write it down, just to be clear. But you can still mark questions. But as a general rule of thumb, that's why, by the way, when we train you on the practice exams, we're gonna ask you to train to 90%. You're gonna say, Michael, do I really need a 90? I just need a 750. Yeah, I know. But here's the problem. You're going to lose points because one, the questions are not exactly the same. It's not an exam dump. Two, you're going to be nervous, especially 2 hours in when you realize you drank 2 cups of coffee before you took the test, and then you're going to have to go to the bathroom, but you can't because if you leave, you're going to fail. So just know, I just want you to understand the method behind the madness. We have put you at a 90% training target for the practice exams because this is going to train you, overtrain you just a little bit above what you need, right, to pass. So you can go for 100 if you want to. I know there's some perfectionists out there. It's totally fine. But just know that's why we put you at 90 percentile. When you do the practice exams, I need to see 90%, preferably 95s and 96s, but 90% will cut it. If you get 90% on both of the practice exams, which I'm going to show you tomorrow, then you're ready to take the exam. If you can't get a 90 percentile in 2 practice exams that you are going to get access to, you should not take the exam. Because remember, that's just with that kind of random set of data, right? And you might say, well, Michael, practice exams, are you saying I should take them again and again? Am I not just memorizing the answer? Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. You're going to kind of memorize the answer, but you're also going to learn the rights and the wrongs of the answers as well. So when we get to practice exams, just remember that I said a 750 was a passing score. So, and that you need 38 questions. Other things that might be useful. So the exam does have specific weighting. So some have more questions than others, but just so we're clear, the questions don't count for more or less, right? So at least from what they've told us, and I've asked questions about this. Remember that you need to only pass the overall exam. So even if you fail a certain domain, you should be fine, right? The content outline, which is probably the next most important section other than what you need to pass, is probably the next thing that's super important. Notice that modeling is over a third, right? 36% of the exam. That means, you're probably going to have about 18 questions on this. Yeah, Chris, you're right. We were just rounding up. We were way rounding up, but thank you for the math. That's good. Yeah, I think it's 20 points per question, but yeah, I think it would just shift you up to the 37, 38 range. So modeling is going to be over a third, right? A little less than a quarter is going to be exploratory data analysis. And then you've got a fifth of the exam is going to be data engineering and machine learning implementations and operations. Good to know, right? Because when you take the practice exams, by the way, they're going to be naturally distributed towards these weightings. So you're going to be taking those questions. By the way, when you take the practice exams, they're going to put some throwaways in there. Hey, they're just giving you the real world experience, right? By the way, the throwaways are not going to be subtle. It's going to look like a real question. Now, you might say, but Michael, what do you mean when you say that modeling is, 36%? What do you mean that exploratory data analysis, right? What does that mean exactly, right? So considering is that, what's the throwaway question? It means it's an unscored question. It's not really a throwaway question because you won't know whether it's throwaway or not. But what that means is that question doesn't actually count towards your score. That's just Amazon testing the question to see if it's valid for you and for their demographic. Yeah. So you're going to have 65 questions. But the reason I mention that is that you're going to get a bunch of questions that are going to be either way above your complexity level or about a service that just came out and you're not going to know anything about it. Do not let it eat your morale. If you see about 10 or 15 of these things, it just means that they put a bunch of questions there to test to see if you knew about the latest service. So don't let getting questions wrong where you're like, I don't know anything about this service. This was nowhere on the thing. Don't let it eat your morale, because it actually did me. That's why I thought I was like, I'm not sure I passed this thing actually. So that's why I'm telling you about it, Chris, is for the psychology of it. Okay. So if you run into a bunch of weird questions where you're like, what are they asking me about this service for? They're probably throwaway questions. Still treat them seriously, answer to the best of your ability, but don't let them like shut you down. Okay, so let's say this is, by the way, where they define the pieces. Like if you come in here right now and you're looking at this and you don't know what Kinesis is, and you don't know what Kinesis Analytics is, and you don't know Firehose, you don't know EMR, and you don't know Glue, well, whatever notebook or note tracking system you're using to track, I'm going to sound like what was it? Van Wilder. Write that down. No, seriously. If you see something in here that you have no idea what it is, kind of like whose list was it earlier? Was it Karita that you showed me your list? You need a list. You got to put a list in there. Please do it, okay? Because if you don't know what these are, you need at least to know what the service does, and you might need to know a little bit about its capabilities, but mainly you know what the service does. Because remember, they're assuming that you have background knowledge. If you took architecting, by the way, on AWS, you would know what those services are. So, you know, just to train you, if you see a gap, write it down. You know, batch, you know, anyway, this is what this exam guide is for, is to show you what they want you to know. These are the domains they want you to have some ideas around. Now, if it says formatting, normalizing, augmenting, and scaling data, you're going to rely on the practice exam. This is a really broad kind of definition to kind of like scope you in. You're also going to rely on the study guide that we gave you, okay? Because otherwise, how would you define that as a training plan? I need to know everything there is about formalizing, normalizing, augmenting, scaling data. Well, guess what? That's a huge body of knowledge. What do you actually need to know? Okay. But like knowing how binning works, outliers, one hot encoding, reducing the dimensionality of data. Yeah, you know, you should know that, right? You know, knowing when you would use a scatter plot versus a time series versus a box plot. Ideally, you would have an idea when you would use that. Correlation, summary statistics. This is the joke I thought you were making earlier about outcome. I thought maybe Jonathan was making a joke about that. I didn't get it at first. I was like, is that a real thing? And then clustering, right? So analyzing and visualizing data. And then we move on to modeling, which, you know, as you know, is 36% of the exam. You know, you are going to need to know like the appropriate model for a given problem. So if you don't know what these are, write these down, or just come in here and download this PDF and highlight it and say, I don't know this, I don't know this, I don't know this, whatever. But you need to know about regularization, including dropout level 1 and level 2. Yeah. You know, how to execute cross validation. You know, linear models and learning rates. You know, how to avoid overfitting, underfitting. How to detect bias and variance. We're going to talk about almost every single piece of this over the next 3 days in some form or fashion. So, but this guide is to basically give you an idea of like what they expect you to kind of have a general idea around. Okay. Notice that some of this, by the way, is existing AWS knowledge. So, including, do you know what Poly, Lex, and transcribe? By the way, there were questions on Poly, on Lex, and on transcription on the exam. Like, I need to use a chatbot for a call center. What do I use? I need to do like the text to speech. What do I use? It's like, I need to transcribe from one language to the next. What do I use? Not using an ML model, but using a service, right? So this wasn't asked. And then understanding things like when you assign a role to a bucket policy, you know, how to check security groups, those kind of things. Again, if you're sitting here going, Michael, this sounds impossible, it's not. Trust me. We've given you a study guide. We're going to walk you through the process. But what I want you to do with this exam guide is just go through and note the things that you really don't know anything about. And if it's 50 things, great. By the end of this class, you will probably know something about 40 of those 50 things. And between the study guide and the practice exams, that's going to fill in the rest of your knowledge. Okay. And then just in case you want to just completely overload your brain, here's all the things that might be covered. And here's all the services and features that are not going to be covered. Okay. But mainly I want you to use this exam guide and I want you to ignore the appendix. I want you to go through this and find out what you know and what you don't know about these services. And if it feels daunting, that's just a feeling. You can just ignore that. There is nothing here that you cannot learn, and it might take some effort, but this is all just a matter of practice and training. There is absolutely nothing here that's impossible to learn. And I bet you if we pulled in some of the people who have PhDs in mathematics and statistics and whatnot, they probably encountered really hard stuff that might be hard to actually from some of us to ingest if our brains didn't work that way. There's nothing here like that. You are able to understand all of this, right? So, questions? Oh, wait, were there any questions making choices due to cost considerations? Yes. There were questions on there like for example, they would ask you what machine size would you use in conjunction with elastic inference in order to be able to run your model at the cheapest like level possible. And it was like and it was a high memory instance, right? So yeah. So there are questions like that. And Angelique, a lot of them are covered in the practice exams. So if you want to know, by the way, the methodology I used to pass this was exactly the methodology I'm given to you. And we have passed hundreds of students like this. So this is not just a out of the box. I just happened to get to put it to the test, right, to see how it worked, because I recommended it to other people. It is not open book. You have no notes, no scratch paper. You can't have a wrist, no calculator. You can't have a phone near you. I'll cover all that stuff, but you can't have anything near you, Chris. All right, one other thing, and then I'll let you go. Wait, did I post the exam guide link in there? I didn't, did I? Here, let's do this. Wait, sorry, Keith, you had to post that twice because I read it and didn't answer. Study guide referring to the Excel document in the student portal. Yes. That's a simplified study guide that is really focused on getting you trained on what you need if you are an experienced data scientist and you want to pass the exam. Here's the big one. So AWS has ramp up guides that they published on every technology. I'm going to put this in the chat. Ideally, you hold on to this. This is all of the free training information AWS has for any role that you're interested in. But you might look at this and go, Michael, I don't see machine learning here. What are you talking about? Scroll down. So you need to know more about containers or game tech or whatever, machine learning. Well, guess what? There's a guide for this. So I'm going to download the machine learning guide. And then here's what I want you to see. This is the full role ramp up guide. This is not the certification study guide. A couple of us, including a lot of people at Amazon, because they got our feedback and whatnot, we helped craft this. This basically is going to walk you as if you knew nothing through everything that you would need to know to use data science on AWS. This is not a 60-hour study guide. This is way more. Okay. This includes machine learning, including deep learning. Notice these 2 classroom classes. Practical data science specialization. Notice this is going to take 3 months. But I share this with you because this can be useful to help get you ready to take the exam. I want you to know, by the way, that this guide has more classes in it than any guide I've ever seen in the history of AWS. And I was like, really? But it also includes, by the way, free workshops, free edX training. I don't know if these are Demi Digital Learnings are free, but it includes a bunch of resources to kind of ramp you up on machine learning in AWS. This is really not for someone who's already a data science, data engineer, machine learning specialist. This is really for someone who's ramping up on it. Okay. I would use the certification study guide to get you leaned out to do this. But if you need additional training resources, you're like, I'm just not comfortable, Michael, can you give me some digital training on math for machine learning? Well, guess what? It's right here. 8 hours, free digital training. Click on that, sign in. You got access to math for machine learning. Okay. So I want you to put this in your back pocket, but this is really overtraining unless you have no ML experience and you really just need to define specific elements. Okay. Otherwise, you're going to use the certification study guide that's in the portal that we looked at earlier. Is anyone unclear about the distinction between using the AWS ramp up guide and the ramp up guide that Booz Allen and WebAge came up with you for certification study? Okay. So we talked about the exam guide. That's probably something you want to look at and figure out if you're going to take the exam, like what items you particularly need to double down on. And then you have the full ramp up guide, which is by AWS. And of course you have our certification study guide, which is inside of your portal. Any questions before we close for the day? Okay, let's be done. It's 5 o'clock. I know you're probably all brain dead. Thank you for hanging out with me. Thank you for asking interested questions. Tomorrow, more pre-processing. We'll do some model training. That's going to be our day. Are we going to do some model training? We're going to talk about model training. We won't do model training until the third day. If you need anything, post on Basecamp. My email address is michael.forrester@webh.com. Otherwise, we are done. I'm just going to hang out here for a second in case anybody has any questions.
Yes, I had a quick question actually.